newspapers sometimes say, let us review the literature about cancer. It can even mean instructions to run a machine. Technicians sometimes say, before you use this device, let us read the literature. Sometimes it even means things that are not written down, like riddles or legends. We might even say that the word means just about anything that we want it to mean. For us today, we will use the word literature to refer to the 6 conventional forms or genres usually taught in literature classes. These are poetry, fiction, drama, essay, creative nonfiction, and criticism. Well, that seems simple enough, but wait a minute. It isn't. There is literature with a small letter L and literature with a big letter L. There are some scholars that think there should be no difference between literature with a small letter L and literature with a big letter L. Most scholars, however, deal only with literature with a big letter L. So what is the difference? Let us take an example. When we talk of literature with a big letter L, we talk about the novels that are considered masterpieces or great works by most scholars around the world. For example, the novel Don Quixote, published in 2 volumes in 1605 and 1615 in Spain by Miguel de Cervantes, is considered by many scholars as the greatest novel ever written. It had a very long title in Spanish. In English, it also has a long title, The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha, but we call it simply Don Quixote. This novel is considered literature with a big letter L. On the other hand, we have, let us say, a romance novel that we can buy in an airport, supermarket, or even in a commercial bookstore. That novel is usually considered literature with a small letter L because, people will forget about it after 100 years or so. It is important when we are studying or teaching literature in school that we teach or read literature with a big letter L. Everybody can always read literature with a small letter L after they, graduate from school or in their own free time, but not when they are studying literature in school. Let us now go to the term literary history. If literature with a big letter L consists of masterpieces or works that most scholars think are very well written, literary history is primarily the history of these works. But literary history is like any other kind of history. You cannot write the history of a country if you just write about the great people or the great events. You have to write about everybody else and everything else. You cannot write only about certain years in the history of a country. You have to write about all the years that the country has been in existence. In the same way, literary history is not only about the masterpieces of literature, not only about Don Quixote and works as great as that novel, but about all other works. For example, we cannot say that the history of Philippine literature in the 19th century consisted only of Torrante at Laura, Noli Me Tangere, and El Filibusterismo. These works were clearly the masterpieces of that time. But there were only 3 of many literary works written and published in the Philippines during the 19th century. Literary history is the history of all literature, both literature with a big letter L and literature with a small letter L. Why is it important to study literary history? So we will know the context in which the masterpieces were written. Since it is history, literary history includes not just the works themselves, but the political, the social, the economic, the religious, the philosophical, the ideological context of the time. A work of literature, whether it is literature with a big letter L or literature with a small letter L, always reflects the society in which it was written. This is an important reason for reading literature. By reading the works that have come down to us from the past, we can learn much about the past. Remember that we are better equipped to deal with both the present and the future if we know what we were like in the past. Now, let's go to the term literary criticism. What is literary criticism? Literary criticism is the study of particular works of literature. In literary history, we study many works of literature at the same time. In literary criticism, we study only one work or only a few works at a time. For example, if we were doing a literary history of the 19th century in the Philippines, we would talk about the life of Rizal. We would read everything that he wrote, not just the novels, but also his poems, his letters, his essays, even his diaries. We would talk about the other writers during the 19th century like Andres Bonifacio, or Marcelo H. del Pilar, or Leona Florentino, or Balagtas. Because we have so much to talk about, we cannot spend too much time studying each of these works in depth. In literary criticism, we take only one or two works and we study these works in detail. We talk about the words in the text. We talk about how the text is organized. We talk about what the text says or does not say, how it achieves what it wants to achieve, that sort of thing. Although we call it literary criticism, we do not criticize the work. We do not find fault with the work. Instead, we try to get the meaning of the work. We try to find out what the author wanted to tell us by writing that work. Now, after doing a literary criticism of many of these works and doing a literary history of the period when the works were written, we can step back and think about what literature really is. What does it mean to us? Why is it important for us to read literature? When we do this, we are doing literary theory. Literary theory is theorizing about literature or thinking about literature as a whole. Why do we read literature? Why do we enjoy literature? Why is literature important for human survival? What does literature have to contribute to the human race? These general questions and questions like it form literary theory. Now, literature, literary history, literary criticism, and literary theory are topics important primarily to teachers. Much more important for us as teachers, however, is literature teaching. Teachers teach literature to students. Why do we teach literature to students? How do we teach literature to students? What should we teach to students about literature? These are questions that other episodes in this series will answer. Right now, I just want to stress the difference between the study of literature and the teaching of literature. Unless we are teaching literature majors in a university, we should separate literature teaching from literary study. We should not teach our students literary history, literary criticism, or literary theory. We should use literary history, literary criticism, and literary theory to understand what we are teaching. But we have a totally different objective in mind when we teach students how to read literature. Unless they are literature majors, our students will not become literature scholars. It is like the difference between studying to be a medical doctor and being a patient. As patients, we do not need to know all the technical terms that doctors use. What we need to know is what we have to do to remain healthy. We cannot know what we need to know unless we ask the doctor. It is the doctor's duty to study medicine so he or she can tell us what to do with our bodies. Similarly, it is our duty as literature teachers to study literary history, literary criticism, and literary theory so we will know what literature really is, what our students need to get from a literature class is not the technical knowledge that we have, but what literature should do for them. And what exactly does literature do for students? Literature makes them better persons. Literature gives them the right values they need to live as productive and ethical individuals. Literature gives them insights into their own selves, their families, their friends, their jobs, their countries. That is what literature does for them. We need to know how to make sure that when they read a work of literature, they will come out to be better persons. How do we do that? That is the subject of the other lessons in this telecourse on teaching literature. This is Isagani Cruz, inviting you to watch other lessons in the series, A Telecourse for Students and Teachers of Literature.
Pagtatanghal sa entablado ang naging paraan noon ng mga Pilipino upang ipahayag ang kanilang mga saloobin at ipaalam ang mga nangyayari sa iba't ibang panig ng bansa. Iba't iba ang kanilang paraan ng pagtatanghal. Ngunit kadalasan ay inuugnay ito sa relihiyon. Halimbawa nito ang sinakulo at komedya at ang zarzuela na sinasabing bersyon ng Spanish opereta. Nagbukas din ang tabing ng pelikulang Pilipino nang ipalabas ang kauna-unahang pelikula sa bansa, ang Dalagang Bukid ni Jose Nepomuceno na tinaguriang ama ng pelikulang Pilipino. Si Atang de la Rama naman na gumanap sa naturang pelikula ang itinuturing na kauna-unahang Pilipinang aktres. Sinasabing ang Gulong ng Palad na unang napakinggan sa radyo noong 1949 ang naging inspirasyon ng kauna-unahang soap opera sa telebisyon, ang Hiwaga sa Bahay na Bato. Ito ay ipinalabas noong 1963.
In May of 2009, Sister Teresita Capurihan had just been appointed as the Directress of St.